Hello everyone, thanks for coming. If you haven't been to the archives before, welcome. I'm Tyler, and today we have Donna Erickson with us to speak about her book and the research she did. And Donna is a consultant on open space conservation in the Rocky Mountain West and was an associate professor of landscape architecture and planning at the University of Michigan for 16 years. She also published extensively in design, planning, and conservation journals, and is also the author of Metro Green, Connecting Open Space in North American Cities. Thank you, Donna, for coming.
Thank you.
Presenting, and go ahead.
Okay. You can hear me okay back there?
Yeah. Oh,
okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
Donna said that she has some books available to buy after this, if you guys would like to, or ask some questions or raise this after.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Great. Well, thanks so much for coming out today on such a beautiful summer day, and thanks to the archives for hosting me today. So I'll be talking about my new book. It's called Rooted at the Edge, Ranching Where the Old West and New West Collide. And it just came out the 1st of April of this year with the University of Nebraska Press. And so I'm going to give just a little bit of background about the book and how it came about and some of the key themes within it. And then I'm going to do a short reading. It's only about 12 minutes long, so I won't drone on too long, I hope, in my reading. And then have some time for Q&A or discussion or whatever, and I'm happy to sign books for those who'd like it. So I grew up on a ranch in the North Hills of Missoula. How many are familiar with the Missoula Valley? Quite a few people, yeah. So the north, this is Missoula. The North Hills are right here. So it's this hilly landscape, hilly ranch landscape between the edge of town right here and then the Rattlesnake recreation area and the Rattlesnake Wilderness beyond that, farther north. So it's the area between the Rattlesnake Valley on this side and the Grant Creek Valley over here. Here's Mount Jumbo, here's Mount Sentinel, just to orient you to where you're at with the city. So these ranches, I was talking to these folks earlier about where the ranches are, and they're right next to town, butting right up to the edge of the city. So that's where I grew up, on a ranch called Skyline Ranch. So this area at the edge of town is really steeped in history, strife, and beauty. And I'm going to come back to all three of those a little bit in my talk: history, strife, and beauty. So again, this is just another view of the North Hills here. And here you see the north side neighborhood and the west side of neighborhood of Missoula, the Rattlesnake, and then the recreation area up here. So it's basically 3 ranches, settled, homesteaded in the 1900s, and by kind of quirky homesteaders, and the ranches have remained sort of in quirky family hands ever since, including my own, I have to say. So I'm going to touch, as I said, on a little bit of the history, not a whole lot, and talk about what some of the struggles have been ranching on this land, and then the beauty of the place and what that means for the city of Missoula. I just acknowledged, too, that the place supported Native American families for centuries before it supported, so at this point, 5 generations of people of European descent. So another view here. Whoops, wrong. So here you see a photo. This is taken from the Patty Canyon area with the North Hills here and with the 3 ranches and the wilderness beyond it. So these 3 ranches were homesteaded in the late 19th century. On our ranch, it was homesteaded for just the 5 years or so until the homesteader proved up, and then it was sold to another family who lived there for 50 years. And then my grandparents bought the ranch in the late 1930s. So it's not the best farmland around Missoula by any stretch of the imagination. It's kind of dry hillsides. It's really good for grazing. It's not the Grass Valley area out west of town or the places that are better for irrigated crops and so forth. But there's just a rich interconnection and history of interplay between these ranches so close to town and the city of Missoula. A huge amount of produce really came off these dry hillsides, and the homesteaders and the subsequent generations of ranchers learned what you could grow on these dry hillsides, from asparagus to rhubarb to raspberries and a whole host of other things that they took into town to sell in Missoula. The other kind of interaction over time, and it was really interesting to kind of research the history of these places in more depth than I knew, having grown up there. But a lot of interconnection in terms of labor. My grandfather would go downtown to Murphy's Corner down on Higgins Avenue and get day labor and bring people to the ranch to work, on daily jobs. So there was the labor, there was coal mined in the hills, there was all this kind of produce that made this really good interaction between the hills so close to town and the ranch, the city itself. So this is kind of an unusual picture because you have to get just right in the exact right spot because of the way the landform works, to be able to see all 3 places, the actual settlement area of all 3 places. Whoops, wrong one. So this is Skyline Ranch, where I grew up. It includes going way up this hill to the ridge line that you'll see in a slide in a few minutes. This is the Moon Randolph Homestead, which is now owned by the city of Missoula and is used as an educational and sort of heritage cultural center. It's a spectacular landscape to visit, and it is open to the public. And then Hellgate Ranch, or the Carlson place, here to the west. So those are the 3 places that really span an area of about 3,000 acres or so, right again at the edge of Missoula. This is again the Moon Randolph Homestead. And in the wintertime, beautiful landscape. So I wrote the book to share stories about a century of change on this landscape and the threats that it faces going forward, really. So I was looking both backwards and forwards and recognizing the status of the lands in the current time, but looking at particularly development threats going forward. And there's an incredible development pressure at the edge of Missoula, as you probably know. History a little bit. Again, I was looking at how people got by in these hills, and it was just getting by. People either lived very, very frugally on these ranches, or they had off-farm, off-ranch income in town to supplement, and my family did as well, to be able to make a living on these hills. And the ranch I grew up raised cattle, sheep, and registered Appaloosa horses. Let's see here. So initially, as I wrote the book, and this was taken on our place, the book was meant to be a natural history of the North Hills, and I do discuss a lot about the native vegetation and the landforms and some of the natural features in the North Hills. But the book took a long time to finish. I worked on it off and on for about 15 years. And of course, like most books, it morphed into a different creature by the time it was done. And hydrate here a little bit. I belonged to a little writing group, and there were four women, 3 other women and me, who all were writing nonfiction books that took place somewhere around the Missoula area. And the other 3 women kept asking for more of me in the book and more of my professional background and expertise in terms of planning and so forth. So it ended up having a lot of more personal and family stories of the North Hills, but I want to emphasize that it's not primarily a memoir. There's memoir-like stories in it, as you'll hear in the prologue that I'm going to read in a moment. But really, the landscape is the central character of the book. In terms of its slot on the in the bookstores, it's called creative nonfiction. And so there's, I tried to do compelling creative writing about the stories that happened in these hills, and tried to make it relevant to other places as well. Some of the natural features, again, of course, the dry hilltops with the bitterroot. And looking back, this is looking back toward Missoula. You can see the M. Whoops, I keep hitting the wrong buttons here. They are not, they are counterintuitive. The M on Mount Sentinel right there to orient you, looking kind of southeast there. So the book really symbolizes issues that are at play at the edge of a lot of Western towns, and where we see increasing homogenization of the landscape, a lot of development pressure, and a lot of ways of life and ways of work are vanishing or changing dramatically. So the themes of the book are applicable in Jackson Hole and in Bend and in Bozeman and other places like that that are growing rapidly. Ranching next to urban neighbors creates unusual difficulties, and one of the themes of the book is really about the challenges and the kind of the unusual situation of ranching right next door to urban places. And so those difficulties range from everything from trespassing to guns to fire, as you see here. This was a fire on our place set by humans, and it was in the spring. It was like in March or so, and it only ended up burning about 8 acres, which was really, really lucky, and didn't get into the big ponderosa pines very much at all. So it turned out okay, but it's a constant threat. Dogs, marauding dogs with livestock, garbage, illegal hunting, etc., on and on. So these and other factors are just part of the strife that I mentioned of trying to ranch next to these urban places. This is a railroad tie fence post that my grandfather set back in the 40s, and you can see the, whoops, I did it again. You can see the charred edge of it from a fire that happened in the 40s, in the late 40s, is the only fire that really went through our place and didn't end up doing a whole lot of damage on our ranch, but damaged the neighboring ranch quite a lot. And it's unusual that the high timberland at the very top of the ranch has never been burned in a wildfire. I mentioned I was going to talk about history, strife, and beauty. The beauty is what attracts Missoulians to this landscape, and the amount of hiking up on the hills that are publicly available for hiking has just exploded in recent decades. And so that contributes, of course, to the trespassing and so forth, but it also contributes to people loving these hills, loving this place. And so one of the stories I like to tell that I deal with in the book is kind of a dichotomy between the ranchers who are trying to make a living on this landscape. And I'll use my mother as an example. She talks about, and she still lives there, what she cares about is what comes off the land. And by that, what she means is the beef and the produce and the hay and so forth. What comes off the land is the important part. And increasingly, neighbors in the city of Missoula covet these hills, and what they care more about is what stays on the land, and that's scenery, and it's elk habitat, and it's water quality, and the ability to walk on these places and have trails. So it's a kind of dichotomy in values and what people care about that is complicates the issues of what's going to happen with these lands going forward. Here you see the top of the ridge line from town at the top of our place. So one of the things I talk about a lot in the book, in addition to the difficulties of trying to ranch next to urban neighbors, is the opportunity and the benefits of having those urban neighbors, because they love these places. And I explore why and how Missoulians are drawn up into the North Hills. And there was a real special sense of community that once existed with the city, especially on the north and west side neighborhoods and the North Hills. And people roamed in those hills, and there was a real a good understanding and camaraderie between those neighboring places. And that's been degraded a lot over time. So the book is partly about redefining what that ranch and town connection can be and looking at that in new ways. After all, if the land is to be permanently conserved in one way or another, as the Moon Randolph place is now, it's the city people that'll pay for that. And so the issues around conserving the land in perpetuity or not are complicated, and they're not resolved at this point. They're resolved on one of the places and not on the other two. Now, I say that these lands aren't conserved with kind of tongue-in-cheek, because I believe that the families who've lived there over all these decades have been conserving and protecting and stewarding these places. But there's still they're in private hands, and the risk of them being developed is very real. Okay, so I would like to just read for a few minutes, and this is from the prologue of the book, which intentionally, of course, is meant to set up the description of what the book is and what it does, and it tells some stories, and so I will start in with that. My son Rye and I visit Skyline Ranch's highest point by exactly the same route, but with different vehicles. Rye, 29, fights forest fires throughout the West from his base in Oregon and trains each spring for the grueling summer fire season. As he grinds his mountain bike slowly uphill, he's wearing his weight vest with its many pockets, each holding a 2-pound weight. He's probably carrying an extra 40 pounds today. It's April, 2004. So this story takes place over 20 years ago. Spring break from my teaching, and I've coordinated my trip from Michigan to overlap with Rise. We've rarely gotten the chance to visit the ranch together in recent years. I drive my mom's beat-up Forest Service green 4x4 a comfortable distance behind Rye, crawling along the 2-track road until we get to a steep hill. Then I pass him and holler, "Looking good, see you at the top," out the window. He's huffing and sweating, pulling in a low gear. I know I'll be alone for a while as he labors uphill, but spending time up there always calms and soothes my spirit in a bittersweet way. We're heading over the top, shorthand in our family for traversing, whether by foot, bike, horseback, or 4x4, a big circle from the ranch buildings up over the east-west ridgeline of the North Hills, above Grant Creek on one side and the Rattlesnake Drainage on the other. So that top that I'm talking about here is literally the ridgeline right there. The ridge with its scattered ponderosa pines is the top of what my family calls the Big Pasture, a 1 square mile fold of hills visible from downtown Missoula. If it were fall, we might see the North Hills herd of elk, up to a couple hundred head grazing on dried bunch grass. Here you see the North Hills elk herd down there in the valley. This ridge is truly an edge, the place where the dark forest falls northward for a half mile or so, then rises toward the wilderness. At the high point of the ridge, I get out and walk a short distance to the edge of the steep hillside. I scan the city and the ring of hills and mountains circling it, a view I've enjoyed by horseback hundreds of times. A slight haze blankets Missoula today. It's not uncommon for air inversions to trap air in the valley. In a couple of months, smoke from fires in the surrounding mountains will linger there. Ryan and his bike look tiny as they enter the Big Pasture at the Four Corners, far below. This geography is coded in place names for us. Four Corners, the Basin, Big Pasture, the Saddle, the 160, the Lone Pine, Lookout Hill, the Meadow, the Lower Spring. In the middle distance, I recognize most of Skyline Ranch's main landmarks, even though the ranch buildings are hidden behind a hill. The buildings of the other two North Hills ranches are also invisible due to the lay of the land, but their rolling pasture land forms the middle ground. The Carlson and Randolph places lie south and west of Skyline Ranch, respectively. Far less lovely, Missoula's landfill is also part of the North Hills scene. And from my vantage point, looks like a large white blot on the landscape with festering stitches carved in the hillsides, angling out from sealed scar tissue. The long view south is out past the North Hills, over Missoula, to the Bitterroot Mountains. We are at nearly the same elevation as Mount Jumbo, which creates the eastern edge of the Rattlesnake Valley. This iconic Missoula landform looks like a sleeping elephant, its rump at the Clark Fork River, and its trunk pointing north to the Rattlesnake Mountains. I moved away from Missoula on New Year's Day, 1980. And for the past 24 years, I've come back to the ranch for a few days in the summer or at the Christmas holidays. I always feel as connected to the land as to the family. During our first 8 years away, my two young sons, their dad, and I lived close enough that I could visit more often. The boys rode horses and provided gopher services for weeks at a time in the summer, which cemented their attachment to both the ranch and their grandparents. Later, we returned less frequently from our homes in the Netherlands, Wisconsin, and then Michigan. Ironically, the longer I am away, the stronger my attachment to the ranch feels. Gradually, I sensed the ranch changing as my parents aged. Eventually, they got out of the cattle business and stopped raising horses, relying completely on off-ranch income. Now other people's cattle graze at the ranch in the summer, and one elderly horse roams the hills alone. No one puts up hay, and the fields grow to weeds. Since my dad died last fall in 2003, the end of one chapter for the ranch is even more certain. It is increasingly painful to see the place lose its vibrancy. Although this has always been marginal ranch land, best for grazing cattle, not raising crops, a lot of tasty fruits and vegetables have come off the place over the past century. The ranch seems to be going dormant, waiting for new life. As the ranch has changed, so have its surroundings. As I look out in spring 2004, development is closing in on two sides. I see new houses going up at the ranch's edges, although the Carlson and Randolph places have stayed undeveloped. People want to live in and near these hills, particularly at the edge of the neighboring Grant Creek and Rattlesnake valleys. The view from the top now includes ranchettes that are neither part of Missoula nor truly part of the North Hills. In my time away from Montana, I've seen sprawling development at the edges of many towns, and I worry about the future of the ranch if Missoula sprawls northward. Still, landscape change is incremental. The view today is not startlingly different than last year. Rye joins me after a half hour, drenched but happy. The big payoff awaits. Most of the ride back to the house is downhill, and he'll get there long before I do. But for a while, we just sit quietly soaking in the view. We perch on a fallen 15-foot ponderosa limb downed by a recent lightning strike. I marvel at the tall blue bunch wheatgrass up here, a big change from the days I worked cattle in these hills. In recent years, only a few cattle have grazed here, so the grass grows thigh-high, even though thistles and other weeds are starting to take hold. As Rye rides off again, I hear the grasses hiss through his spokes. I stay at the top a bit longer, watching him swoosh downhill through the basin and the Four Corners and across the 160. He'll cover the 2 miles to the house in mere minutes. The view is much as it was when the Scandinavian farmers first settled these North Hills. At least the scene in the middle ground is the same. However, on the flat valley floor, Missoula's houses and commercial areas spread much farther to the south and west, even climbing the lower slopes on the south hills opposite my viewpoint. But the grassy hills, treed ridgelines, and graceful swales of the North Hills are just as they were when my grandpa put his cattle out in the spring on good bunch grass. Sitting at the top, I view the ranch through both personal and professional lenses. While I bring my profession to bear on Skyline Ranch, I look out on the big pasture and see habitat, open space, ecological corridors, and view sheds. A vocabulary that's not, words that are not really in my mom's vocabulary. So she looks at it in a completely different way. I understand its combination of vulnerability and great promise, and I am not alone. The city of Missoula and several land conservation organizations have tried to prevent this land from being developed. When the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation's national office was at the edge of downtown Missoula, its employees literally kept a close eye on the ranch. They set up a telescope in the front window, trained on the big pasture and the elk using it as winter range. The foundation was interested in that land staying open for grazing elk. My academic expertise about the ranch overlaps my personal feelings about the place, tied up in family legacy, childhood experience, and a hands-on working knowledge of getting by in the North Hills. All of that is complicated by living nearly 2,000 miles away, as well as by family dynamics. Driving the pickup down in Rye's wake, I pilot a course through high grasses that camouflage the route. I'm feeling my way on the not quite road, barely a two-track, hitting a rock here and a badger hole there. I know every subtle landform as I drive past the water trough, along the lupined hillside, and below the high voltage power lines. I cannot count the times I've navigated those ruts or ridden as a child in the truck bed, jumping out to open gates for the adults. But knowing this land stems even more from a childhood and early adulthood wandering these hills on horseback. Closer to the house, I drive across flatter ground, a hayfield planted by my grandfather that, for decades, produced good alfalfa hay. Bucking hay bales into a truck bigger than the one I'm driving now comes to mind as I think of the hot summer days of my child and teen years. Back home in Michigan, while driving down some country road later this summer, I'll have the window rolled down and smell newly mown alfalfa. That sweet, earthy aroma will instantly take me back to this field. The visceral connections to the place, to the people, and to work itself always return me to childhood. For many years, the smell evoked guilt. I wasn't at home to help put up the hay. When that summer rendezvous with Rye ended in 2004, I flew back to Michigan and he drove back to Oregon. As my plane tilted into the sky at the end of the runway, I looked out at the window and could see the North Hills, a lovely muffler between Missoula and the wilderness. Looking at it from the air, seeing its whole shape and the definition of its periphery, I understood it forms a core piece of who I am. It is achingly hard to leave, and I know I want to influence what happens to this piece of ground. And by the way, I ended up moving back to Missoula about a year later. This is the story of Missoula's North Hills. 3 families who settled there, and a Western community that has, over time, been both supportive and challenging. I seek to dig deeper than family legacy. Lifestyles change, people come and go. The land stays immovable, silently waiting. The history of these edge ranches typifies hundreds of Western places caught in the schism between the old and the new West, and the generations of families drifting between them. North Hills stories apply to other towns that were once nourished by farmlands at their edges, but now consider paving them. I want to leave time for discussion and Q&A. I'll end by just talking a little bit about the end of the book. You've just heard the beginning of the book. And the end was hard to do because there was no conclusion. There was no resolution, really. And so I end the book with kind of my vision of what I'd like to see happen in the North Hills and the kinds of objectives that that land might provide, everything from productivity to the scenery, to conservation, to wildlife, to education, and so forth. So that was hard to bring it to an end without knowing the end of the story. But of course, a piece of land doesn't have an end. to the story. And so this was my attempt to try to resolve the various stories that I tell in the book. So with that, I would encourage some questions or discussion, and just a couple quick notes before I show you the book. I did all of the illustrations for the book myself, and so the cards you see up here are from the drawings that I did 20 drawings to illustrate the book. If you do read it, I would love to have some kind of review, even 3